when we look at love as a spiritual discipline, we see that the true love only can manifest when a person is able to actually accept even the weaknesses and the challenges of other person. And that is very hard to find. And when we cannot really accept other person fully or as best as we can, unfortunately what happens is that there's a lot of harshness that manifests in relationships.
Welcome to A Way of Thinking podcast. This podcast is dedicated to lighting the way towards greater inner peace and purpose. Hello and welcome to this episode of A Way of Thinking. I'm your host, Jessica Huang. And this episode, we have a very special repeat guest for the first time ever. So today's guest in this episode is Prem Sadasivananda, who is a very dear friend to me. And I'm so excited for you to listen to this episode. If you haven't already, definitely check out the first episode that I did with Prem, which is episode number 21, where we cover off on his book, Empower Your Life. And so today I decided to take a different shift and totally different conversation from the first episode. And I thought it would be nice to talk about relationships with Prem. And Prem is such a wealth of information. And I think that this was such a great topic and very pertinent at the moment because we're heading into the holidays and everything. And so I think that this episode is super special. And we touch upon some great topics that I think are definitely great for this time of year. This episode actually was kind of a continuation from the end of the last episode, where I asked Prem what his number one skill they thought everyone should work on, and he answered tenderness. And so this episode starts with us talking about tenderness and actually looking at it from the perspective of tenderness towards ourselves first, and then towards others. We also talk about compatibility, like what we are looking for in a partner. And we talk about conflicts in relationships. And we end talking about loneliness. How do we handle when we are feeling lonely and that disconnection from our relationships, and ultimately that disconnection from ourselves? And so I hope you enjoy this episode. I think it's super sweet and super special. And hopefully you can take some of the wisdom as we head into the holiday season. And so before we get started, I want to make a few quick announcements. So first off, I want to make a quick shout out to our listener, Michael Tintevsky, for donating to the podcast. And if you would like a shout out and to donate to the podcast, you can do so at my website, jessicahuangcoaching.com/donate. Okay, so I am incredibly grateful for all of you who are tuning in, and I love being able to share all this incredible wisdom with you. So if you would like to support all the work that goes into creating A Way of Thinking, it would mean the world to me for you to donate to the podcast. And thank you again so much for listening. Next up is that if you would like any help with creating your own dreams and really moving yourself forward into a creative career, then please sign up for a free discovery call with me at my website, jessicahuangcoaching.com. It is really, truly my purpose is really helping people discover and move out of the careers that they had chosen when they were, teenagers and trying to fulfill their parents' wishes, and being able to move into something that might be more creative, might be more purpose-driven, passion-driven, and more aligned with who they want to be as they move into the next chapter of their lives. So if that sounds like something of interest to you, please go to my website for more information and to sign up for a call with me. And last but not least is if you want to practice with me, you can do so on Sundays. I teach a variety of practices: psychic development, which is a pranayama practice. There is yoga nidra, which I think everyone could use a little yoga nidra in their life. Yoga nidra is an incredible practice where you are lying down and relaxing your entire body so that you're allowing yourself to kind of self-heal. It is really a very special practice. And, especially at this time of year, as we are needing to kind of slow down a little, as the weather gets a little colder, I think Yoga Nidra is a very important practice. So I also teach that on Sunday mornings. And there's, of course, charging practice if you need a boost of energy also during this time. I welcome you to charging practice, which is a Dharma yoga asana practice. So it's hatha yoga. And I would love to see you in class. I teach in person at Dharma Yoga Center and online on Zoom. So if that is of interest to you, please reach out to me on my Instagram or on my website. My Instagram is Jessica Huang Coaching, and my website is jessicahuangcoaching.com. So I hope to connect with all of you. And thank you for tuning in to this episode of A Way of Thinking. And I hope that some of the wisdom impacts you today. So without further ado, here is my conversation with Prem Sadasivananda. Our guest today is Prem Sadasivananda. Prem is a direct and long-term disciple of Swami Vishnudevananda, the disciple of Swami Sivananda. He served as a sannyasi for over 24 years in the Sivananda organization and was the director of the Sivananda centers in New York City and London. Prem is a scholar of Vedanta philosophy, Hindu scripture, and Sanskrit, and holds an MA in Sanskrit. He is a trained musician holding uplifting satsangs and kirtans. He has taught hundreds of yoga teacher training courses through the Sivananda organization and continues to share his wealth of knowledge through his many courses on the Yoga Scriptures, Bhagavad Gita and Yoga Sutras, meditation, positive thinking, anger management, and relationships. He is the author of Empower Your Life and Open Your Heart to Love, and he is based in New York City. So Prem is actually our first two-time guest on the show. So welcome once again, Prem Sadasivananda.
Thank you, Jessica, very much. It's my pleasure to be on this wonderful podcast, A Way of Thinking. And I'm actually impressed by all the wonderful guests you have and the ideas that are being served and shared with others. So, yes, this is me. I will start with a short prayer and then we can continue. Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahanao Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvina Vadhitamastu Ma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Peace, Peace, Peace.
Thank you so much, Prem. It is such an honor and pleasure to have you back on the show. And, we were just saying how funny life is that we happen to live in the same building together. So it happens to be extremely rainy out today. And thankfully, you did not need an umbrella to come to this podcast recording because you merely had to walk downstairs.
Thank God.
So that worked out quite well. But yes, it is such a pleasure to have you back on the show. And today we were thinking to kind of switch it up. Last time the episode was very focused on your book, Empower Your Life, which if anyone has not checked out that episode, please go back and take a listen to that episode. It is filled with so much incredible wisdom. And today we were talking about having our focus a little bit different today. So we are focusing this episode now on relationships because we were talking about the idea that, many of the things, oftentimes like the biggest things that are really kind of like the trials and tribulations, I feel like, of our lives are either around the relationships that we have in our lives or the things that we do with our lives, right? And so I feel like the last episode was focused on the doing, right? Like, how do we empower our lives? How do we, channel the power of our thoughts to manifest the life that we want and all those kind of great ideas. And so today, instead, we're focused on the relationships that we have and the trials and tribulations around that. Yeah. So the way that I was thinking we could get started is actually kind of perfectly leading off of the end of our last episode. So, in the last episode, the very final question I asked Prem is, what is the number one thing that you would have everyone work on? And Prem's answer was having more tenderness. And that really struck me, right? Like, I love that word tenderness. Like, how do we really bring more loving tenderness into our relationships? So that is where I thought we could begin today. So, Prem, I would love your thoughts on developing more tenderness in our lives.
Wonderful. As you all know, our life is nothing but really numerous relationships that we have. In our scriptures, we divide the relationships into three. One is the relationship with oneself, relationship with others, and we can also say a relationship with nature, or the creator, whichever way you want to put it. All these three relationships require some training and education and work. So it is not uncommon to see that people enter into this stream of life and do not really know how to look at something outside of them in a kind of respectful and deep way. Perhaps to some degree we can also blame our the speed of our modern life, and even the very technology we're using here, it's kind of separated us a little bit from one another. Lots of families are struggling. So I think the subject of relationship is a perfect subject that leads us into the Thanksgiving dinner, and it's leading us into the Christmas and holidays, parties, and everything. So it is a very delicate question, not necessarily only in the world, but also equally in spiritual organizations. And we find that we can have a relatively successful practice, but our relationships still may suffer, and very much so because the relationships that we have with others are simply they mirror our own relationship with ourselves to a great degree. So if a person, for example, lives with some traumas, either from the childhood or later in their life, he or she may unconsciously project these traumas into the relationship, and is in fact as a way of bonding, which is may sound very strange. So tenderness is my favorite word. I have another word that I love very much, and Swami Sivananda mentions, it's mercy. I think the tenderness is an aspect of a personality that is very rarely practiced by anybody, or most people never even use that word. It's a very kind of old-fashioned, I guess. But we do have moments of tenderness many, many times in our lives. If we are, if we are around animals, especially, or elderly people, or babies, of children in general, we find that we naturally become tender because we are aware of the vulnerability of the lives that the individuals kind of manifest, and also the tenderness connects us to something deeper within ourselves, right? So tenderness is a it's like a manifest, or some form of love. Really, it's giving love in a way that is unconditional. It's a pretty much pure way of connecting with somebody. And I believe that in traditions or cultures where people tend to live simpler and they're more community based, we may find more tenderness. And because in such a societies, for example, you hear lots of children's voices, and everything is happening, the multi-generational. And I think when we start to kind of isolate ourselves, not necessarily that we really want to, but just by the very nature of life, we tend to lose that tenderness. And also something as a quality is something that essentially we must first find it within ourselves, towards ourselves. So among the three relationships, really the crucial relationship is how one sees oneself, and how one whether one has a capacity to accept oneself or not. Because where we look for tenderness, we look for some expression of love, which is a little bit, not a little bit, sorry, it's larger, and it's a greater container than just what people may call love between the two people. And this is not a love necessarily that you don't need to be in a relationship to be in love. You can be in love with anything and anybody in this world without any kind of strings attached to it. And I feel like, the tenderness is just a lovely way to express one's love for neighbors, for community, people, for everybody. And plus, it's also where when we look at love as a spiritual discipline, we see that the true love only can manifest when a person is able to actually accept even the weaknesses and the challenges of other person. Uh, and that is very hard to find. And when we cannot really accept other person um, fully or as best as we can, unfortunately what happens is that there's a lot of harshness that manifests in relationships. And this is why I believe if we were to solve some problems on an individual level, we may have to examine the importance of tenderness in all these three relationships. There's something beautiful also when we're tender with ourselves, and when we're tender with other people, and even when we're tender with God, right? In the beautiful feeling of devotion, there's a tenderness. And Devika was sharing with me this Padre Pius. I don't know if you know about him. He's a great saint of India, and she was sharing a book that he wrote and his letters. And I remember seeing some of his letters and some of the saints that they wrote around that same time, maybe even 50 years or 100 years ago. There was such a tenderness in their letters. They were almost like an excuse for whatever they wanted to express, hoping that there would be not even a tinge of any kind of upset that could cause by what they said. Like I said, oh my God, this would be my, now at this age, I have to say, maybe not before, but now I would love to practice that all the time. And tenderness first requires that we look at ourselves also with more openness. We have to understand that we live in a less than a perfect, life, and there's the whole concept of perfection, which has stressed so many people out. I think should be really a little bit put aside, and instead of using perfection, we can use like an ideal that you want to work towards and move towards. And I think tenderness is a great way to move towards a very pure and unconditional way of relating to everybody. But we need to start with ourselves. So, if as a little homework, we could all try to think of some moments when we really got upset with ourselves and how hard maybe we were on ourselves. We may be hard on ourselves without knowing that we are hard on ourselves. For example, we may be hard on ourselves by not letting ourselves rest, eat on time, or, be a workaholic, which is a typical thing. I'm not against striving, but always striving without giving a rest to oneself is like, it's like that could be a form of tenderness, maybe that you would just say, listen, it's okay. You can slow down a little bit today. You can start tomorrow with rejuvenated strength. And the tenderness when we're dealing with our own feelings, when we're dealing with our emotions and thoughts, we must learn to meditate with tenderness. This is one of the principles of Thich Nhat Hanh's teachings, where you start your practice in an open kind of a state of mind, and you create a little smile, and you say, okay, this is what I'm dealing with. This is the mind, not anymore my mind, but this is the mind that has been, it's like a child that's been conditioned in a certain way. And there will be emotions and thoughts that I really do not necessarily align with in my normal and daily life when I'm using my intellect, but still these are parts of my beings. There may be some memories, there may be some injuries that you received in your past from other people, from bringing education, anybody, and just approach it in a softer manner. I think that's the first thing. Then uh, as we work on ourselves, we will find that we'll naturally already become more tender with others. So, the tenderness requires that you have a certain inner kind of a discipline and inner life, because I don't think it's possible for just anybody all of a sudden to become softer. They would not see the reason for it.
Mm.
So the tenderness is the result of a great self-observation and greater ability to self-reflect, because if we have that, then we have like a key to enter into somebody's heart, to our being, and we are able to understand what these people may be going through. And even if we do not understand what they're going through, we can understand that they suffer, and then that suffering should be already enough for us to feel tenderness. But the most important thing is that the tenderness should be expressed. So when I look at sometimes, cultures, even in India, even in Japan, or perhaps some other countries, when you sit around to eat, there's wonderful dinner or something, but the way that they put the food down for you, there's such a tenderness in it. They're not like throwing a plate to you like here in a kind of a some kind of a New York restaurant, and you just have to make sure you're doing a splash by everything. I mean, it's there's a respect, and I
Mm.
think that's kind of what it leads us to. Tenderness leads us to recognizing the something special and about that person, even though you may not like them. There may be another question of people who say, "But what if you don't like somebody? How am I going to be tender to that person?" I would say in that case, the tenderness may take some little different form, not necessarily be the sweetest of the sweetest, but it would be something that when we practice will benefit us, will give us some peace. And when the people see that we're not aggressive with them, then they will naturally start to kind of loosen up to some degree. Not, of course, in all cases. So the respect is kind of a thing that I feel like it's lacking in relationships. People tend to take each other for granted. You know, they've forgotten what it looked like when they just met. When they had that
Mhm.
actually tenderness, maybe it was fake, but it was at least there because they really liked somebody. They were fascinated by somebody's qualities. So I feel like they once the person is in your possession, right, then you're like, okay, forget about tenderness, no more flowers, no nothing, just you know be kind of tell them right into the face whatever the truth you think and I think this is a big mistake. The one thing you find that when for the relationship to be successful, we can talk here about like a loving relationship between two people. One has to project above the image of the physical, because in the physical and attraction of the physical, there cannot be ever happiness. It will be for a little while, and then once that kind of wears out, it's done. So we need to look for something beyond that. And what really links us to other person is something that escapes most people's even imagination. That is the divine that is in that person that finds the reflection of the divine within us.
Mm.
This is what the scriptures tell us, the Upanishads tell us, when you love somebody, you love yourself in that person. Now, you don't love yourself necessarily with all your weaknesses and strengths, but you love your essence, like that's kind of what's the dearest to you, and you recognize that in a sort of a mystical way in another person. You don't find it in everybody. For that, you need to be a sage at least. But when you become a sage, you'll see that same essence in everyone. But for us, we cannot do this right away. So we start by recognizing it first within us, and then uh, creating a projected image that takes us beyond just the name and the form of the person. And then we really realize that this is like a God's being here. Whether I existed or not, this person actually carries some light or something like that. And then, in regards to that, is to remember that in every relationship, and it doesn't need to be just love relationship, but in every relationship that we have, when we meet something new, be very we're very kind of attentive. We see everything about that person. We remember everything. We look forward to seeing them again. But then when you know somebody for a long time, you almost like it wears out, and the capacity to see the new something every day, which is what love does, is lost. When a person is truly in an experience of love, every day discover something new about the person. Every day. It could be the smallest something, and there's an excitement that the people. That's how people tend to to be motivated by love. There's like an excitement because love is really also about learning and knowing somebody or something. And we see this with animals, how masterly they do that. For an animal, you're never an old person. They never walk out, past you and they say, "Oh, it's just same old my boss." It's like this and like that. They always, because of the nature of their needing to be present in every moment, they're always seeing something that is unique to that moment and that day. And that's exactly kind of a practice that one has to have in relationships. And from there comes tenderness flows quite easily. So
Hmm.
basically, that's an introduction to tenderness. 20 minutes.
I love it. I was like, there's so much that we need to talk about, but I didn't want to interrupt you because it was very incredible to listen to you talk about it. I love what you were sharing there though, because tenderness is not a word that I think we think of much. But there is something to be said for it. And I love the way you were describing how we'd have this natural tenderness towards animals or children or the elderly. Like there's something there that we naturally will exert this kind of tenderness towards them. But then it gets lost in the shuffle when it comes to anyone else. And the reflection of it was so funny because, as someone that thinks a lot about self-love personally, I've never thought about the word tenderness towards myself. So that really struck me when you were saying that. I was like, huh, like what a light bulb to me. Like, how can I apply tenderness to me? And I feel like, and it's so funny because, I think that there is this general schematic, right? That we can often show love towards others in a way that it is very hard to show it to ourselves. But then on the flip side of that, it needs to, in a way, start with ourselves for that pure essence of it to be able to show to other people.
Mm.
So there's this funny dichotomy, right? Like the inability to show it to ourselves, but the deep need for that to have like real love come through towards others. Would you agree with that?
Yes, totally. I think when we are kind of more tended with other or made more gentle or more accepting, it is usually because we're accepting something that is generally also a reflection of something that we feel within
Mm-hmm.
ourselves. For example, if we um, let's say if I have accepted that one can have the past that may not be necessarily beautiful, there may be lots of traumatic experiences, problems, then I'm kind of able to accept this in other people. Where the non-acceptance comes when we see somebody that is, let's say, angry or aggressive or any of these kind of qualities that we would then think, how dare he looks that way? How can he do this? And that is because that part of ourselves has never been accepted by us.
Yes.
So in fact, it's not possible to accept anybody, any aspect of somebody's life or behavior unless you exactly embraced it in yourself. And when you say embrace it, it doesn't mean you condone it in a sense that you want to perpetuate it. You see the right, the right and kind of a wrong of it, but maybe the wrong is not even necessary there. You just want to move on. So similarly, the moment we make these adjustments, we start to see the people in a very different way. It's like almost automatic. And I think tenderness is rooted in what now modern people will call it mindfulness, right? I will call it awareness. I think as a very big part of it is that we need to learn to slow down, because that's what the tenderness does. Like presenting a meal to somebody, like because you really respect them, you're so happy to have them at home, you cannot rush it. It's just that the rashness and tenderness really don't go together. So I believe that our way of living, unfortunately, is so fast that when you're on a keyboard, you're banging it, and it's like we're almost machines. We're attacking them because they're attacking us. So then we are, we're cooking or banging things in the kitchen. It's like, because it's we're in speed and we're actually stressed.
Yeah.
And so stress and tenderness are two opposite things. So if you want to be tender, you have to take a deep breath and relax a little bit, and then maybe do it. A good exercise would be to, for example, two exercises. One is to try to start your day in a tender way. Oof, that sounds like a song. So tender day in a way. So you try to, let's say, when you wake up in the morning, try to take that little morning as slow as possible, because morning is slow, the energy is slower. We're not meant to race out of beds and jump and go to work. So just to kind of even becoming aware that you're just woken up, maybe give a little appreciation to the Lord. Say, thank you, Lord, for giving me one more day. It doesn't matter what day you give me, just give me the day. And then at the end of the day, I may say, thank you, Lord, for this day to have come to an end. Also, sometimes we have this kind of prayer too. But start like that gently. Then you step away from, on the floor, you go to the bathroom. Everything you do, you handle gently. So Swami Sivananda was very known for that. He says you have to put as much of a energy of tenderness, literally, into like putting your pen together like this, as you would be like talking to a king or somebody. We don't have them here, but let's say something like that.
Sure.
So I think that's the way to do. You start your day and you try to stretch it, like for, let's say, first you do like several minutes, then try to do like maybe 20 minutes, and then you meditate. So you continue. Try to meditate with tenderness. You will see your quality of meditation will be very different. Because when you meditate with an idea, I got to finish by whatever minutes, then you're already tense, right? And same thing when you do your yoga. It's a wonderful way to just understand how your body works. And we know that our body is never the same in 2 consecutive days. And if we do that, we may find that we don't necessarily hurt ourselves often. Another thing is that another exercise could be to pick maybe 3 things that you do daily. Like that's a common kind of a activity. One is speaking. One is walking. One something else. And you try to do them in as soft way as possible. So softness, tenderness, awareness, mindfulness are all interconnected. And then it's really what happens is that those aspects of these practices or those components are all components of love. Love means being able to listen. Love means to be present, to be tender in everything. I know, we may sound a little bit like, some kind of idealist here, but honestly, the world can dramatically change if you just add a little element of it. That's why I say, you go shopping, you tender with the with person, with teller, right? You just, how are you? How is it? And maybe they will not answer. Maybe they're not interested in you, but something you will touch in them. Somebody cares.
Mm.
And I think tenderness is really about respect and caring for others. It's a big subject.
I love that. I think it's important to remember that we can do that in small doses,
Mm.
and that, it's like, yes, you and I have like extensive practices, but I always like to remind people, like, even if you set aside that 5 minutes for yourself to be slow and to, take that time for yourself, like, that is meaningful, right? And that will naturally maybe expand over time, because you'll find the benefits of it and be like, oh, I want more of this. I think that kind of is a natural thing. But I feel like it's reminding ourselves that we all need to start somewhere. And even when it's like in little bits, right? And to your point, like, I love the idea of what you were saying there around like putting 3 activities through your day that are focused on being slow and being tender and caring towards ourselves. Like, I think that's really powerful.
Very good. Yeah. I mean, it's like learning, even though you're tender, right? But you're learning to take that sense of self-importance out of it. So whatever you tended to, that's really what's important. Not that you're not important, but it's just that's the only way to really show the genuine the tenderness is to understand at this point I don't need to control the outcome of this situation. I don't need to try to control the outcome of what this person, what they're going to say, how they're going to react. But I'm coming in with the pure intention and pure energy of tenderness. And if that's what they like, it's okay. If they just not don't like it, it's also okay. So I'm finding it that with the practice of that, you tend to less kind of impose your ways of thinking on others, and people start to feel more comfortable with you because nobody really likes to be changed, and nobody likes,
Yeah.
honestly, even when people ask for an advice, I remember this, they come and say, what can you tell me what you will do in this situation? I said, I'll tell you what I will do, but I know you're going to do something you're going to do. It's like it's your life,
Yeah.
and I think it's okay. That's kind of, we have right to own our own attitudes in situations. But the higher level of practice would be to practice with somebody who may not be kind back to you.
Mm-hmm.
So perhaps you start with those that can easily be the recipients of tenderness, children and animals and everything. And then you can move up a little bit higher, be well rooted in all this tender kind of things. And then you can move up and, try to be tender towards tigers in human forms or something like that. But again, the first kind of idea that I tend to see this is to try to accord the respect in relationships, and I find that in itself like sets the tone for tenderness.
Mm.
But I really watch people who have that a little bit refinement. I think that's a very huge spiritual quality, and that's why we do find them in places like India, in East, and as I said, in Japan. I mean, you find also the tenderness everywhere. Like you find in Latin America, wherever people are like so happy to serve you something, and even just to see you. I think this is something that will probably revolutionize the whole America if they could just think, you know, if the people could just think, okay, well, I should accord respect to this person. If they cannot really do it, and if it's like they are non-doable situations sometimes, that's
Mm.
okay. But that's not the reason to give up the practice.
Sure.
And as you
Sure.
said, 5 minutes to begin is very good practice.
Absolutely. It's so funny because as we were talking about this and like the ability to have those kind of connection points, for some odd reason, what was coming up to my brain was going to Trader Joe's, because it, like, people have very mixed feelings about this, about how friendly the cashiers are. But I feel like there is something to be said for that because there is this kind of like, it's strange, but I actually would say there's a level of tenderness I feel around like the care of the person I'm talking to at the cashier. I don't know if you would agree with that.
I was kind of I always I like to go to Whole Foods. Unfortunately, you don't get any level of tenderness. So, from the point of view of organic food, there may be a larger kind of um, amount of or whatever volume of stuff, but at the same time I've never experienced tenderness there of any kind. Very
No.
very rarely, I have to say.
Yeah.
Sometimes people are sweet, and this is exactly what I think that the modern businesses are about. you know if you want to make it successful, you have to bring them back in. You're right, and that's why I think the Trader Joe is successful.
Yeah.
They have a very good I think customer relationship, and with the customers. And so I feel often when I go to a restaurant here to eat someplace, if I find that people are like rough, I don't feel like coming back, especially because that kind of is projected into the food in a way.
Hmm.
And I mean, I personally choose places where I feel like I want to feel more comfortable, when I'm
Yeah.
shopping.
Yeah, yeah. It was just like a
Good
funny thought.
idea.
Yeah. I was like, there is something to be said for the fact that that is part of their business model that I find
Yeah.
interesting. A lot of mixed opinions about that. Some people avoid it at all costs because they hate that. So, but
Well,
but
I
as someone
think
that
it's sweet.
enjoys
Yeah.
connection, I find it very sweet and comforting.
In a big city means a lonely city, especially in New York City. It's so nice to find somebody who is willing to like just accord you a little respect, and even if it's fake, even if it's done for the sake of it's a it's business policy, but it's a great business policy.
Yeah,
I mean, they
yeah.
do it in banks. I mean, I'm sure you're aware of it. When you
Hmm.
come to the teller, they're like some, not all of them, but So yeah, we look kind of, surely sometimes consciously, sometimes unconsciously, we're looking for some recognition of our own selves for who we are, which also means let's just be kind with one another. This life is like it's hard enough for most people, and I think a little more of a tenderness was certainly would would add something to life.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, yeah, I want to talk along the lines you had brought up, like our relationships and how we are kind of like, I like to think of it as like we're mirrors of each other. And
Mhm.
what you were saying there before around this idea that, like, when we like someone, it's because there's some part of our essence that we're seeing in them. But then the flip side of that, right? Like when we don't like someone, it's because of something within us that we see in them, right? Like, and I always find that so interesting, right? Like the ability, like how our own perception of ourselves is really what is causing the like enjoyment or not enjoyment of a
Mhm.
person that is in front of us.
Absolutely. That is actually a psychological law that you know, they say that the beauty is in the eye of beholder, right? So it's a
Mm-hmm.
famous state. We dismiss something or somebody. It is like we have dismissed part of that within of our own same kind of a part within ourselves. And sometimes that can be very difficult to notice because it's so much easier to see it in another person. When the people say, how can anyone do this? Well, maybe that person has done that, but you may have done something also that you have done, maybe not to the same degree. None of that's irrelevant. Actually, the degree of things, like
Mm-hmm.
somebody kills somebody, of course, how could they do this? You may not kill, but you may have hurt somebody in ways that would be abhorrent to some other people. So I think we realize that in every person, there's humanity is like a much bigger, like aspect. There's bad sides, good sides, and all of that. But also the problem is if we do concentrate on something we don't like in people, we are certainly not going to be able to see what good they have in them. And the unfortunate thing about this is that we lose an opportunity to learn from other people, however difficult they are.
Mm.
Now, I do say also, if people live in abusive relationships and situations, do not tolerate it. I mean, try work through it. If it's not happening, I'm happy to suggest go away and find something else. But sometimes the relationships can be a little challenging, but there may be a good learning in them, provided that they have no abuse any kind of in them. So liking and disliking people is not the best standard of judgment of others, because obviously we like people who are similar to us in a way that you like yoga, I like yoga, therefore I like you. But suppose you say, well, you only lift weights or something and you hate yoga, I will contract, right? So I'll say,
Mm.
oh, this is not good now. So we should be able to understand where the other person may have their own, obviously attitudes about everything. But here comes an interesting component of relationships, which most people don't think about, and that is for success. This is outside of everybody. This is just like if you're looking for a relationship where you want to enjoy some similarity with other people, then that's obviously based on compatibility. And compatibility exists in nature too. You don't usually find, elephants and mice hanging around together. One is a little too small, one is too big. Nor would they fall in love with one another for sure. But it's like um, some compatibility has to be taken into account, which was much more of a subject that was discussed in the past, and also in, I would say, primarily Eastern countries. They will have a horoscope, they will draw something, and then they will say, okay, these people have similarities. Naturally, only when you meet somebody, you would know whether you're compatible or not. We may not meet, sorry, when you actually spend some time with them, living with them. So I am a big proponent of understanding compatibility if you want to have some lasting relationships with people. Even though in this world you cannot find what does compatibility mean, that's another thing. For example, if two people are compatible, um, like, let's say one partner likes to watch movies and eat, like, whatever, chips or something, and the other person loves exactly the same, so they get compatible on that, so they
Mm-hmm.
have great fun watching movies, eating chips or whatever else. Anyway, so that is the compatibility of that type is okay, but the thing about this, you don't want to be 100% compatible with somebody also,
Mm.
because then there's no contrast and there's nothing that you can really learn from other person. So the learning aspect, is going, I think, obviously, it varies from relationship to relationship, but you will find that often people have a very difficult time if they're very incompatible, because they have to use up a lot of energy to overcome the incompatibility.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like there's fighting, there's arguments, there's all kinds of things. Whereas, like, if there's some communion of people, at least on some level, it's easier to say, okay, well, you can be different with some or from somebody, and those differences could be assimilated rather than being the cause for people to go apart. But for that, we need the spiritual approach to relationships. Now, what this means is that the relationships should be looked at as spiritual practices. So they should not be just limited to, romanticism and stuff like this. That's okay. That comes in the beginning and it goes before you blink with your eyes. So I think that excitement that people, of course, have when they meet somebody, um, sometimes is of such a nature that they can stay for a long time between two people. But it's not an emotional excitement or something. It's more like of a, you know, like two people meet and there's like a spark, and that spark is what needs to be maintained. And they can
Mm.
be 90 years old and there will be a spark. And there can be, you can have young couples and you have all of that and no spark. Like spark is only physical or quickly goes. And so the compatibility is a big issue because we need to obviously examine in many areas, because sometimes compatibility may be there and then people can change. Like I've seen people who, you know, take a teacher training course in yoga and all of a
Mhm.
sudden the partner cannot read them anymore, or doesn't want to read them, doesn't want to accept it,
Right.
and then they separate. Or and in other cases there are, I've seen also where the other partner would be actually quite enriched through his wife or husband's experience, and would say, oh my god, ever since she took this yoga course I feel like I'm learning something, I'm becoming a vegetarian, something like that. So there are all kinds of possibilities. So compatibility is very, very important. Even in astrology, we have compatibility between the planets and incompatibility, and we
Mhm.
know what it means is you can't just put, two opposite people together to live in the house. They will kill each other. So I think that's only in relationships. Sorry that I'm bringing the most kind of uh, dramatic kind of a vision of it, but it's important. And even compatibility between the brothers and sisters, in a family, it's obvious that it can be there, it may not be there. So I believe in certain compatibility where you can have some differences and have some similarities enough to can be enjoying, spending time with people. And then at the same time you can learn something from them, they can learn something from you. But if you take your that relationship and any other relationship as your spiritual practice, you realize that you can be so much more for each other than just partners or anything like that. There's two things that really unite people, especially couples, quite well, and that is if they share the same type of food. This is typically known in the East.
Mm.
So if one eats burgers and another one is eating like some kind of a vegan stuff, it might not be quite compatible. Even in the kitchen, they were looking at each other like with not so much of a tenderness. So there would be a tender beef on one side and tender something else. So I believe that that's one thing where you don't need to have completely the same taste. That's not what I'm saying, but to make it comfortable enough so that people can share the same meal.
Mhm.
And then another thing that is very helpful is if the two people who are together should do some practices together, spiritual, even yoga and everything. And that way, the partners work for each other's liberations. They don't just focus on themselves. That's like a old-fashioned school. You won't find many people doing this. They say, "Oh yeah, yeah, you get my wife to meditate with me. It would be difficult." Or husband, or whatever the partners are. It's okay, but I think the tenderness is linked to all of that love, respect, but it's also compatibility. Sometimes you just can't do it. You can be tender with your angry father, and there's nothing you can change in that person. So you are tender not because you want to change somebody. You're tender because you want that to be your kind of a main way of dealing with people and things. We're not tender for other people. We're not. We want to kind of embody that quality.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, as you were saying that, I was like, man, I feel like it is so challenging trying to understand like how similar is the right amount of similar and how dissimilar is the right amount of dissimilar when you're trying to like find your partner. And I feel like that is, even as you were talking about, I was like, it still feels so difficult to like, because it's not there is no perfect amount, right? It's not like you can be compatible in these ways and that is good, and then you don't want to be compatible in these other ways and that is good. Like there is no prescription.
No, I mean, you could look at it in this way. For one, if you are able to, and this is what in American native tradition they used to do. They used to organize some kind of parties where people could meet, you know, and the young people would meet or whatever, and they would eventually, if they liked each other, they would go and first live with one another. So there was no a commitment to loving one another, because they, just like most of these traditions, they say love is not with what you enter into relationship with. You enter with some, okay, a couple of illusions here and there, but you also come with a kind of romantic kind of idea, excitement on it. But that is not love. Love is something that you put on a stove and you cook for like, several years or something. Then we see if that's manifest. In which case, it's hard to define love like that. But what happens is that they see that they try to live together to see whether they will be able to maintain a respect for one another even after a certain amount of time they've been together. And if that's not there, then we'll go apart. And if it's there, they may stay together. So I think that's kind of a key thing. If you're looking at the person you're with and you say, okay, well, this person, yeah, she or he is different from me, but yet that's also something unique about them. I mean, what would be fun if they did exactly what I'm doing? Like, I would not like to have anybody like this. They sit the same way, that they eat the same food. Like, you just leave me alone. I think that would be too. It's already stressful to bear one person. Imagine to have like your kind of a, what do you call it, a clone kind of a thing.
Uh-huh.
So I think the percentage wise is only relative, of course. But let's say if you're 20% compatible and 80% incompatible, you're gonna have wars going on. There will be flying saucepans literally in the kitchen and everywhere. So you want to go towards maybe 60-70% of compatibility. How are you going to ever measure it? Don't ask me. But the rest of all would be maybe some incompatibility, which would be a very good training ground for both of you to
Right,
go.
right. It gives you the level of foundation that it makes you think of like same attracts same,
Yeah, yeah,
right? So you want that kind of baseline amount of sameness that you can build upon, but that additional 30-40% is the challenge place that allows you to grow as a person.
right on the spot. Yes, exactly like that. You just completed this thoughts of mine. I really think that's the way to grow. I think. And we also have to think of the compatibility may be present in other relationships, like friends and even your work area and everything. And obviously we cannot choose that, but we tend to gravitate even in work area towards this guy because he's kind of shares some same thoughts as I do. And the guy is like, forget it. Like, we can have this kind of opinions. But another beautiful thing about this is that, I really feel like you need to think that the relationships are never going to be perfect, and then just relax. Because if you think, okay, I got to raise this to 80%, 90%, it's going to be. There are no perfect relationships because the karmas are fallible. They, we're trying to maintain them, and it's not always easy. But I have to say something that a lot of these relationships, whether they're good or bad, they have the seeds or roots in past lifetimes. For example, Buddha used to say that his wife and him have been in many incarnations together. So there was an utmost tenderness in between them. And that's after what they've worked through probably in the previous lifetimes, maybe from suspense to less suspense, like flying. So I like this to no suspense and going somewhere. So like this, step by step. So if you find your relationships, whether it's friends or whether it's partners are actually not easy is because you have not really created a firm foundation in your previous lifetimes. Sometimes people have that kind of a love at first sight, or they have friendship at first sight. It's not, nothing is like, um, there's no effort put in because they met before they worked through it. This is
Mm.
how also friendships come. And when it comes to friendships, I think that's kind of an easiest way to practice tenderness,
Hmm.
because you really love the friend and you don't have any expectations from them after all. So it's like, you can just be your best tender thing ever. So I like that also.
Yeah, absolutely. I was thinking about what you were saying there around like, because on the flip side of that is the conflicts that we enter into, right?
Mm.
And so, it's that whatever percentage. And I think about like why am I being challenged in this way by this person, And to me it's like we need to be around to some, I hope it's not all the time, but to some degree being challenged by the people that are in our lives as well, because we are meant to grow through those conflicts. So, can you speak a little bit to that
Mm.
idea?
Sure. I think there's no life without conflicts. There are no relationships without conflicts. But I think conflict is the best way to kind of chisel that kind of a sense of self-importance and to try to grow
Mhm.
into a bigger you than you are. I think a lot of people have fears about that, certain aspects of their nature or their life being, shaken up and challenged, and you know, there may be some kind of areas within us which are not serving us anymore, and we are not able to access them. So then the person who is reflecting something of that within the relationship may be of great help, but we need to put our own ego down, and we need to say, okay, well, I have to learn something here. That is the most beautiful thing about relationships, because even with friends, you see, you can feel comfortable, and that's wonderful. But then there is a limit to it too, where sometimes, the so-called enemies or even the difficult partners and friends can be actually your true friends, because first of all, they're merciless. When they try to show you that something is not right about you, they will come again and again and again, and you like think, oh
Mm.
my God, I can't take this anymore. So I think conflicts are important. However, they need to be handled very well, and both sides are responsible for it. So there need to be rule of engagement set up. If you're living
Mm.
with somebody and somebody's attacking you, okay, then you say, listen, can we just talk about this rather than you attacking me? Because talking is different from attacking. So then you set the rules of engagement. And what I like the most is that I've learned actually from some Buddhist practice. It's called active listening.
Mhm.
And yes, most people know that. And I just love that, where you accord 5 minutes to this person, 5 minutes to me, and then some little rules of engagement, like to let them speak whatever they want to say, and you don't interrupt them. And then you speak for 5 minutes, you ask them not to interrupt you. And then some other sub rules are there. And I think that's the best way to talk in any conflict. First, the sides need to be heard. And even though there may be exaggerations in the interpretation of what they saw or heard and whatever, you allow them to actually own those exaggerations and maybe taper them down as the conversation goes on. And the most important thing about this approach is to not necessarily look for a solution in a single discussion, because you may need more discussions. It may not even get solved, but that's just a way to kind of keep really the energy balanced. And I think this is not taught anywhere, unfortunately. Uh, if I was if I was instituting a new marriage ceremony, I will make sure that the partners go through this training. Not marriage, but just partnership. If you want to like live with somebody,
Mm.
How do you resolve differences after all?
Mm-hmm.
And which leads to conflict. Differences are the foundation of perceptions that of each person they may end up being more violent or aggressive than they should be. Again, this is just a pure training, and I think that training is missing even in spiritual organizations. But tell you, sometimes if you want to say something to the main person, you can be soft, you can say whatever you want, but you will not be listened to exactly in the same way. Or you will be listened to, but there will be very likely, depends who it is. I'm not saying anyone specifically here, but you could have a situation where a person just doesn't do much about what bothers you, you know, especially if something is of your making or your own problem. So I feel like that could be uh, a part two to tenderness.
Mm.
What does it mean really to accord listening to another person? You can't accord listening to another person if you're not going to give them respect. If you're just going to sit there and wait until they're finished in order to come back with another round of the same facts or things that you think you're
Mm-hmm.
providing as facts, that's what people do. They listen, kind of, and then they come back with the same story where there is something quite true in some beautiful thing can manifest in that silence of those 5 minutes and everything. I'm a big believer in that, but I have to say it's very hard to convince the other person to do that.
That was exactly my thought, right? Is like, as much as we ourselves can take responsibility to show up and actively listen and be there
Mm.
in that space with the other person, how do we manage through the fact that if the other person on the other side of that equation is not receptive, is not open, is not willing to hear us?
That is a very good question and a very challenging practice. So the only answer here is that you insist on inputting uh, according the respect, giving the same kind of a ear to their problems and everything as if they were in agreement, and not
Mm.
raising voice, not using sarcastic remarks, just saying, like in typical thing, active listening, you will say, is this what you said? So you would ask them, is this how you saw me? And they will then, believe it or not, if there's any kind of a juice between the people still left, like some spark, then I think that gradually the other person will start to kind of at least ease up, because you're not criticizing them.
Mm-hmm.
You're not teaching them they have to speak in a certain way, but you just say, okay, that's it. This is what I feel. And obviously, if the relationship is not going to work, and I mean, each person has to give up some of the, sense of, oh, I am important, and what does she know, and what, like, people are
Being
like that.
right.
Yeah,
Mm.
you give up to being right. Yes,
Mm.
which kind of leads us to giving up for having to even have a solution for this situation for this particular moment. Maybe if something continues, of course, people have to make a decision whether they stay or go apart. But I feel like this is a very good practice. For myself, I love it, and most of the time I try to practice. Sometimes, the old habits come, the irritability comes, and you just say, "Oh, come on!" It's like I'm not going to even try that, because it may look to you almost an artificial way. Maybe you feel like you're suppressing something in yourself when you're just trying to be not nice, but to be respectful, right? It's very difficult to be respectful
Mm.
because, well, see, the one principle of practices is that you should not wait until there's a big challenge. Any form of spiritual practice, whether you're working within fearlessness or kindness or anything, you practice it in the atmosphere where it's not too charged, not too difficult, like that. So let's say between two partners, it would be better if they practice this when there's no charge between them.
Mm.
So just like they cook together, they talk together, they practice that. And I think may sound like a dream world, but I think it's we need to move in that direction, because the world the way it is really actually built on the other side. I'm right and you're wrong, and then boom.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, I think it's so powerful, that idea of like, how can you still show tenderness to someone even if you're not receiving it on the other side? Right. And maybe it can't quite get to the word tenderness, but maybe it's, how do you show respect, as you said, towards the other person, even regardless of what you're receiving, right? And how can you show up in that way? And that is a practice. Like, that is extremely
Mm.
challenging when you're not getting it in return. But maybe by still being able to show up that way, it does like kind of chisel away at their ability to come towards you with the animosity that they had before, right?
Mm.
Because you're not feeding it back to them, let's say.
Very true.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's hard, because the little hurts in us or big hurts in us, they're ready to spring back up. We all have
Mm-hmm.
like these push buttons. They're waiting, and usually when you live with somebody like this, who actually has learned how to hurt you, what hurts you the most, they can use it in a nasty way. That's like
Yeah.
a great irresponsibility, unfortunately.
Mm.
um, you know you would not normally do this with people outside. So people do all kinds of things, but I think the training is the key word. And perhaps one should meditate on the value of tenderness. Like, you sit down, you say, okay, why should we be tender? Maybe you don't need to agree with everything that's being said here, but you may want to think for yourself. And then Swami Sivananda would say, meditate on the benefits of being tender. For one, your health will benefit. You know, your level of stress will decrease. Even when you're around somebody who is very aggressive, if you're able to keep soft, it's like it's easier, right? Than to try to prepare for a war all the time. Then it drains your adrenals and everything.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we already have a lot of adrenals running in our lives simply because of the way we live.
Mm.
You know.
Absolutely.
So the stresses and tenderness and stress. So sometimes we cannot quite slow down. We would like to. But I think if we start to create this habit of slowing down whenever we can, it might be a good way to move into tenderness.
I love that. One last thing that I want to talk about, this actually was something I wrote down just from your first bit about tenderness, was the idea of loneliness. And
Mm.
because as you were talking about that and like the ability to show tenderness to ourselves, I was thinking of the flip side of that, which is when we feel loneliness. And I was curious what your thoughts are around like what causes people to feel loneliness and how to kind of overcome that. I see it as the reverse of everything we've been talking about, right? It's almost like a lack of connection, the lack of connecting with ourselves and others, and whatever is greater, right? The creator and all those kind of things. So, can you speak a little bit about your thoughts around that?
Okay. Loneliness is another big subject, because there may be many factors or supporting factors behind it. But you're right, the loneliness comes from lack of connection. I would say, since we cannot have a 100% connection with people around us, or we may not have enough time to spend with them, we can actually think about loneliness as being something that is very much contributed by modern way of living.
Mm-hmm.
As somebody wrote an interesting book, like it's called, some time ago, she wrote a book called Alone Together. That was like in reference to technology that we have. So you have these little likes coming up on your Facebook or Instagram or whatever,
Mm.
and each time you have like a little dopamine kind of being released in your brain. You think, oh wow, this is so cool. Somebody loves me or cares for what I do. But that's an illusory kind of thing, and so the technology in itself operates in isolation, you know. So unfortunately, that is a big contributory factor. The actual loneliness experienced even in the spiritual path. There are moments sometimes when you feel like, oh my God, I'm just doing everything by myself and I'm tired and all that. And a lot of people feel that. So the best way to overcome any experience of loneliness is, for one, is to physically see others. You know, I
Mm-hmm.
think to be in somebody's company, you share some energy. Whereas, you know, if you do it on Zoom and this and that, it's like a sense of connection, but it is not a true connection. It is true to some degree because we're still psychically connected. But I would say that for one, you want real life. And this is why communities that are still not sophisticated operate much better. And in that sense, I mean, people can still feel lonely, but it's different when you have your brothers, sisters, and everybody's around, and it helps. You can be in a busy city like here in New York City, it can be very lonely. I
Mm-hmm.
sometimes I feel that way, but I think the important thing about loneliness is that you have to transcend the idea of where this, what causes this loneliness in terms of not having a partner, not having enough friends and all this, and then to connect to the true aspect, which is, you may say God, so you can say whatever you want to call it. That should be where the true connection is. In fact, there is not even a matter of, it's not even a matter of connection, it's a matter of the existence of unity. But you have to work towards recognizing that. So, of course, practically speaking, there are many ways one can do to try to feel less lonely. And as I said, you know, maybe offer some service someplace, you know, cook for homeless people. Think about how homeless people feel. Do they feel, I mean, most people would say that they're, you know, either drunk or out of their mind or something. But there are a lot of homeless people who are really genuinely okay, like mentally, but they're
Mm-hmm.
homeless. And there's a story of this, what's his name? Um, I've forgotten his name, but anyway, there's a lovely story there where um, a man who was a Buddhist teacher and his wife, they were kind of organizing the retreats so that you can spend a week as a homeless person.
Mm.
They will make sure it's a set up in a safe environment, but you will sit on the street sometimes, and that was a part of our jobs. So the deal that you would, let's say, a lawyer comes, right, and he or she has to spend 1 week just not having much food, depending on a few things. They will watch them, so make sure that they're not totally stressed. But the interesting thing is this guy who was a lawyer, he said, you know, he was kind of a good looking guy. And he said, my God, that was amazing. Like after a few days, you know, he didn't shave and looked kind of really rough and he was stinking a little bit and all of that. And he said, the one thing that really bothered me, because he has to dress also like a homeless
Mm-hmm.
guy, is that he says, nobody looked at me.
Mm.
So that was one thing. He says it hurt me so badly. Maybe not so much not having to eat on time and all that, because he knew there was an end to all of that. But he said that hurts him a lot. So then there was a woman who was really homeless, and this wife of this gentleman, this teacher, she goes to her and gives her $1, and before she, and then she asked her for a name. And all of a sudden, that woman or girl burst into tears and uncontrollably for a few minutes. And she was just asking, "What's happening? What's happening? Why are you crying? Did I hurt you? Did I say something?" She said, "No." It says, "Nobody in all the years I've been homeless has anyone asked me for my name.
Mm.
Like it's that so bad." So you see, again, loneliness is, you know, in this extreme cases like that, but just really recognizing the presence of other people is a big step to first even loving others, and the other thing is, of course, even overcoming loneliness. Loneliness is a very tricky thing because sometimes it can be also connected with depression and or like loss of motivation. So then they have to find somebody like yourself to do this lovely little, um, how they say, to have an appointment and to be guided step by step, because that's really what it is. You don't want your heart to be closed when you're feeling lonely.
Mm.
And there are lots of lonely people, especially old people. Old people are mainly lonely.
Yeah.
They can't leave the house. Sometimes they're sickish, whatever, and they're waiting for the youngster to come and see them. Nobody has time for them. Think about modern times. So when you visit hospitals, also these are all good meditations for us. We meditate on how is to be an old person, how is to be in a hospital. Yeah, we just lost a friend recently. She
Mm-hmm.
was 15 months on a ventilator. I mean, this is like, talk about loneliness. Ours is nothing, right?
Mm.
So imagine somebody who is in that bed for that long, cannot move, and then they have to process everything in their hearts, and God knows how they do it in their minds, and the long nights, all these things. So that's kind of what I say. You do contemplate that. It's interesting how animals generally don't feel that lonely. They have a
Mm.
way of, it is built to be by themselves. So we can learn something from the four-legged beings.
That is an interesting point. Like some animals are so solitary,
Yeah, they're
and
quite content.
yeah, and that's just like their nature. But I feel like as humans, like we thrive on
We
connection,
do. We do.
right? And not to say that, because I like the idea of like it's not there's also the benefit of like being alone with yourself is like the flip side of that is solitude, right? The enjoyment of doing things by yourself, of being able to reflect and
Mhm.
connect deeper to yourself. But there is this element of like, how do you hold to solitude and not drift into loneliness?
Yes, and I think the practice of active practice of solitude within a retreat, spiritual retreat, is a very good practice
Mm.
for that. You know, because we are kind of surrounded by things, by sounds, by video clips, by everything, but we're still lonely. So that obviously means that that's not what will fulfill, what will remove loneliness. But I feel, you know you have to do a combination of things, and one is get the friends, call them, torture them to see them if necessary this week, not in 6 months time, and then do things together, go to concerts, go to meditation. Yoga class is a wonderful way of bonding. Even in yoga class, you're not chatting with the person next to you, only maybe we're doing some fancy variations, but generally we're just happy to share the same space, and we feel kind of supported in that space. So I believe that spiritual centers and ashrams are built for that reason, to help also people.
Yeah, yeah. I think community is just of the utmost importance.
Hmm.
And yeah, especially in this kind of like fast paced world that we live in, it's like, how can we slow down and really spend time with each other,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
like put the phone down, be present in the spaces when we are together, and the importance of being able to do that and listen and share that time.
Yeah, so true. And it just came to a couple of images come to my mind. One is on the like on a subway, like everybody has their own phone,
Mm-hmm.
right? So nobody wants to even look to the left or right. They will never remember who was on the side unless you look kind of weird. And then you have also partners going. Two people go to for a meal and they're both on the phone.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's a loneliness that is not categorized as loneliness, but it can be had even within the relationships.
Absolutely.
Especially if you feel like you're not understood, you're just, like so many little things like that. So loneliness doesn't mean you're just alone. It's a kind of a thing that the person can be alone and it can be a great communion with the divine. That's not loneliness. So that person obviously has trained himself or herself to get to the stage. But it's also another point to look at.
Yeah, yeah. No, I mean, I think that's incredibly true. You can be in a crowded room and feel incredibly alone.
Mm-hmm.
And so it takes it's like there's a certain level of effort that we need to put in to building, to being present, and to being able to like create that connection point, that it's easy to not have that happen. You know, it's
Yeah.
easy to be lost in our phones. It's easy to have these disconnection points. And so on the other side, it's like, how can we make sure that when we are there with other people, that we are really seeing who's in front of us and being there with them?
Very true. And plus, you have to kind of not worry about how other people see you, like when you're with others,
Mm.
because that's kind of what often prevents us from coming and connecting with somebody. But what Thich Nhat Hanh said very beautifully, this is another point that we see in our society. We all have heard of this sex trafficking and things like this going on. Obviously, all addictions have to do with some form of loneliness. And we see how this is what he says is that the people feel like they could overcome loneliness by just, engaging in this kind of, activities that are really illegal, or they're just like, wrong in many ways, but
Mm-hmm.
that's just how people do. That's like a really a bane of modern living, where people will actually feel so desperate for some attention or something that they will pay for it, you know and then other form of desperation makes these people go this far to become who they become. I'm not going to name anything, but you understand it.
Yeah.
So even that whole realm, which you find in pornography, you find it on it's all due to separation, loneliness, and everything.
I think you bring up a good point in that it sometimes it's the fear of who we are, and someone thinking that we'll be rejected for who we are.
Mm.
Right? So it's harder to put yourself out there as the real true person that you are, because you assume that people won't like that, or they will reject you, and like you can't face that, right? And so I feel like that is what breeds these kind of things that occur, because it's like our ability to really put ourselves out there and accept ourselves for who we are can be really challenging.
Well, the thing is, when you're worried about that other people will not accept you who you are, is because they won't accept you how you see yourself.
Right.
So you're really worried about, would they really see me the way that I see myself? And then like, no, they will, like, so that's kind of
It's self-rejection.
totally, yeah.
Yeah.
You know this when you start like teaching yoga, like the first time you go and you think, oh my God, they probably see my insecurity, my this,
Mm-hmm.
whatever it is, first time or second time, it doesn't matter. But that's not how people see you. I have been in a situation where I thought, oh my God, how could anyone possibly like this, what I just said or what I did, like, yoga class or whatever. And they say, oh, I really enjoyed your class. I enjoyed your talk. And I said, really? And you see how much of that
Mm.
projection is actually, um, it's simply exaggerated on our part.
Yeah.
Maybe there's something that we know about ourselves. Okay, it's fine, that we don't want other people to know, but at the same time, it's so exaggerated. And then we can live in hell like this, missing so many opportunities to meet people and connect. Perfect.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's lovely. That, or not lovely, but that's such an important thought, is what I should say. Because it's true. It's our ability to, it's going back to our full thing, like our ability to have tenderness towards ourselves will enable us to then be able to put ourselves out there as who we really are.
Nicely said. Yes, exactly.
Yeah. It all comes back around. All right. Well, we have been talking for such a long time. And I feel like, it is endless the amount that I can talk to you.
Thank you so much.
So I will say thank you to anyone who has gotten to this at the end of this episode. I so appreciate you enjoying my conversations with Prem. It is such an honor and privilege every time to have these deep conversations with you and, talk about the ability to have tender and loving connection. I feel like that's what these conversations get to be, and I so appreciate it. So I hope anyone who is out there is enjoying listening to this as well. So thank you so much,
Thank
Prem.
you so much, Jessica, for inviting me again. It's a complete joy and a perfect subject for today. Really, it will encourage me more to grow into it.
Yeah, same here. Same here. I think I love this topic because I think it gives us so much food for thought and the way that we show up in our own lives.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, that's honestly, sometimes I think that's the reason why I do this is that it allows me to learn so much. In every episode, it's like I get to learn from every single episode, and it is the most beautiful journey. So thank you for being a part of that for me.
You're welcome. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you so much for everyone listening, and we'll see you in the next one. I'm sure there will be a part 3 at some point. So thank you.
Thank you.